Our top stories tonight. Seoul is keeping a door to dialogue open for Pyongyang, but another nuclear test would have a huge impact on regional security. That's the warning from South Korean President Geun-hye. A higher than expected number of voters turn out on the first day of early voting for Korea's June 4th local elections. And if you're a motor fan, Busan is where you want to be for the next few days. The biennial Busan International Motor Show opened to the public on this Friday, where the auto industry is rolling out its newest models. Early edition begins now.
I see trees of green, red
늘 남편 먼저,
I see them
늘 자식 먼저.
for me and
레이디 퍼스트라는 말을 믿고 살아온 당신. 오늘만큼은 세상 누구보다 당신이 먼저입니다. 한 분 한 분 특별하게 모시겠습니다.
Excellence in Flight, Korean Air.
It is 5 a.m. in New York, 5 p.m. in Singapore, and 6 on Friday, the 30th of May here in Seoul. Hello, this is Early Edition at 6, live from Seoul. I'm Moon Geun-hye.
And I'm Daniel Che. Thank you for joining us. Although election day is still a few days off, Koreans headed off to the polls on this Friday. This as early voting has become an option for the first time in Korean local elections history.
Right, and it looks like many are taking advantage of this new system. The National Election Commission announced that as of 5 p.m. this Friday, 4.27% of the electorate had cast ballots, which is a better than expected turnout. Our political correspondent Geun-hye reports on the first day of the two-day early voting period.
For the first time in Korea's local election history, a two-day long early voting period started this Friday. Without prior registration, voters can cast their ballots from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Korea time if they are unable to make it on election day, June 4th.
I won't be able to vote on the actual day of the election, so I think this early voting system is very convenient.
Voters are only required to show their resident registration card to cast their ballot at any of the more than 3,500 polling stations set up across the nation.
I think the early voting system is great, as it does not require prior registration. And since the polling booth was nearby our workplace, we were able to vote during our lunch hour.
Electronic devices located in every polling booth recognize the barcode on the ID cards and take the fingerprints of voters. But some voters complained of problems.
It was not easy finding our way to the polling booth. I think we need more signs to guide voters.
For added convenience, smartphone users can download an application that provides information on the locations of nationwide polling stations and the list of candidates in the local elections. Officials from Korea's National Election Commission have been dispatched to each polling station to manage and monitor the voting process. Through the early voting system, the National Election Commission expects the voter turnout this year to be higher than it was in the previous local election in 2010. Geun-hye, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, lawmakers in Korea's National Assembly have agreed to hold a full and thorough investigation into last month's Seoul ferry disaster. The 9-day probe will begin on Monday. Now, a plenary session of the National Assembly passed the proposal by an overwhelming majority of 224 out of 226 participating lawmakers, with 2 abstentions.
The agreement comes after days of wrangling between rival parties over whether to include specific names of witnesses in the joint proposal. The main opposition, New Politics Alliance for Democracy, had been demanding the inclusion of Presidential Chief of Staff Kim Ki-chun. The ruling Henry Party insisted on leaving the selection of witnesses to a special parliamentary committee. As a compromise, they meet halfway. The two sides agreed to subject presidential officials to the probe, with the head Kim Ki-chun being required to report to hearings. A diver involved in recovery efforts at the Seoul ferry accident site died this Friday afternoon. The man in his mid-40s complained of breathing difficulties and was transported to a hospital by helicopter where he later passed away.
Now, doctors have not concluded a cause of his death. The civilian diver was part of a team that is cutting into the 4th floor of the vessel, which should speed up recovery efforts for the 16 victims that still remain unaccounted for. He is the second diver to die since recovery operations began last month. President Park Geun-hye has issued a stark warning. She says that if North Korea makes good on its threat to conduct a new form of nuclear test, it'll almost certainly trigger a nuclear arms race in this region. Our Park Ji-won has more on the president's interview with the Wall Street Journal.
President Park Geun-hye has warned another nuclear test by North Korea would have a huge impact on the security landscape in Northeast Asia. In an interview with the Wall Street Journal this week, President Park said a new test would have a domino effect with North Korea's neighbors feeling compelled to develop their own nuclear weapons to arm themselves against such a clear threat. She warned it would be difficult to prevent such a scenario from playing out as, quote, North Korea would effectively be crossing the Rubicon if they were to conduct another nuclear test. She added, a new test would also make the six-party talks on North Korea's denuclearization irrelevant. She said Seoul was closely cooperating with the other members of the six-party talks on a number of levels. The president singled out China's role in resolving the issue, as Beijing exerts huge influence on the regime. China is North Korea's biggest trade partner, accounting for 90% of the regime's external trade. She added that China has firmly expressed that it won't accept a nuclear North Korea and will take steps to deter Pyongyang from going ahead with another test. The South Korean leader promised to forge ahead with her trust-building policy with the North and seek out ways to boost inner Korean economic ties. North Korea threatened to conduct a 4th nuclear test in March, following its previous tests in 2006, 2009, and 2013. Satellite images indicate North Korea's nuclear test site has been active and a test could happen at any time. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
North Korea agreed with Japan to reopen a probe into its kidnapping of Japanese citizens decades ago in exchange for Japan easing some sanctions on the North. But the international community is taking a wait-and-see approach to the agreement as Pyongyang has a history of making promises it does not intend to keep. Our Shin Se-min has more.
Japan's deal with Pyongyang has touched off concerns that Tokyo's unilateral lifting of sanctions against North Korea could cripple joint international efforts to halt the North nuclear development. The Korean media is citing an unnamed South Korean government official as saying that the move could have a negative impact on denuclearizing the North. The U.S. has refrained from making direct comment on the possible impact of the deal while stressing the need for clarity in talks with North Korea.
We continue to support Japanese efforts to resolve the abductions issue in a transparent manner.
Experts are hesitant to jump into any conclusions on the possible impact of the deal as Pyongyang has a track record of backing out of its commitments. As for how the deal will affect ties between South Korea, Japan, and the U.S.,
I don't actually think it will impact the relationship that much, in part because we have to wait and see if the North Koreans are actually going to do anything, right? I mean, the North Koreans have said in the past that they would work on this issue, and they have not.
Political observers say at least a couple of months are needed to determine how the deal pans out. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Japan and China will play out the next round of their bitter territorial dispute later on this Friday at a security forum in Singapore. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is expected to use his keynote speech, which is set to happen in less than 2 hours from now, to urge Japan's allies to work together to counter China's rapid military rise. Our Kim Hyun-bin reports.
At the 3-day Shangri-La dialogue in Singapore this weekend, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe will urge allies in the region to work together to counter the rise of China, while promoting a greater role for Tokyo in security matters. The call will come when the Japanese leader gives a keynote address this Friday evening, citing the heightened tensions in the South China Sea and East China Sea. Abe's top government spokesman said the speech would make the case for constructive discussions towards peace and safety. China has already expressed anger about the Abe administration's move to reinterpret its pacifist constitution. This speech will only stand to anger Beijing more. Led by Vice Foreign Minister Fu Ying, it's expected to describe Tokyo as a real threat to security. The summit involves the United States and ASEAN countries, including many that are involved in territorial disputes with China, like Vietnam and the Philippines. Japan and Beijing also have their own dispute, brewing over a set of disputed islands in the East China Sea. Attention will be paid to the response to Abe's call, as many ASEAN nations are hesitant to take any stance that may harm their economical and political ties with Beijing. In another discussion that is sure to draw the ire of China, the defense ministers of Korea, U.S., and Japan will meet on the sidelines of the dialogue for talks about beefing up missile defense cooperation in the region. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
Digging deeper, getting to the bottom of stories that impact your life. Talking with you on air and online. Connecting you with experts on the world's most pressing issues. News and current affairs at its best with Moon Geun-hye and Daniel Che on Early Edition at 6.
Last month's deadly ferry disaster is casting a dark cloud over Korea's still weak economic recovery. Newly released figures for April shows the effect is being felt across all industries. But experts say the impact isn't likely to last. Our Hwang Ji-hye reports.
The sunken Seoul ferry disaster threatens to wreck Korea's fragile economic recovery. Statistics Korea said Friday that output across all industries dropped 0.5% in April from a month ago. The agency said the drop is largely being seen in the service industry, which includes the leisure and lodging sector, reflecting lackluster domestic demand brought on by the disaster. But many say the trend won't last so long.
The moderate pace of economic growth comes from the sluggish domestic demand, which is not keeping up with the pace of strong exports. On that trend, I believe the ferry disaster added negative pressure temporarily.
In fact, the nation's industrial output, which is less affected by the ferry disaster, grew 0.1% in April from a month earlier, marking 2 straight months of expansion. Facilities investment also rose more than 2.5%. Still, business sentiment among Korean manufacturers worsened this month, going down for the first time this year to 79 from 82 in April. A reading below 100 means pessimists outnumber optimists. The Bank of Korea, which releases the monthly survey, says the slowing Chinese economy and strengthening won soured business sentiment. And with the sentiment remaining sluggish, experts point out that the data for May and June will decide whether the nation's overall economic trend has turned downward. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
The U.S. economy contracted to start the year for the first time in 3 years. The Commerce Department says gross domestic product contracted at an annual rate of 1% in the first quarter. The government's initial estimate was 0.1% quarterly growth. However, experts say it's only a temporary setback in the long road to recovery. They forecast a robust rebound in the second quarter, fueled by strong demand. Some economists said they are optimistic that growth will remain above 3% in the second half of this year, as labor market conditions are improving and consumer spending is picking up. Back here in Korea, local currency traded at the strongest level in nearly 6 years this Friday morning, but retreated on speculation that authorities intervened to curb the rapid gain. The Korean won closed at 1,021 against the greenback to close the week down slightly from Thursday. The won hit 1,017 at one point during trading, the strongest since August 2008, but took a sharp turn after the foreign exchange quickly raised the gains. Authorities there have been pacing the won's strength near the 1,020 level this month as appreciation pressure continues to weigh.
Now, if you love cars, the place you want to be for the next few days is Korea's southern port city of Busan, as that's where a biennial motor show is currently underway. A car is up for grabs every day during the show, but there is more to take as for what to expect for the future of the industry. Our Song Ji-sun gives us a preview.
The bustling city of Busan is now the go-to market for domestic and foreign automakers alike. 1 out of every 5 cars on the road in this port city is imported, the highest rate in the country, representing the purchasing power of Korea's second biggest city. That's just one of the reasons more and more automakers are choosing the Busan International Motor Show to unveil their latest models. Hyundai Motor pulled the curtain back on its AG for the first time, a luxury sedan developed to cater to those with a budget between $30,000 to $50,000. Hyundai also unveiled a diesel version of its best-selling Grandeur model to provide customers with more options.
We felt the need to diversify our luxury lineup to retain our customers. We found drivers who opt for larger diesel models or demanding efficiency and practicality. Models made by German automakers are popular, so we launched the first diesel in our luxury lineup.
Vehicles powered by greener engines are worth keeping an eye on. Among the more than 200 cars exhibited here at Bexco, a noticeable trend emerges in the rising number of hybrid and electric cars aimed at lowering carbon emissions. Developing and supporting low-carbon vehicles was one of the major issues discussed during the OECD International Transport Forum held in Leipzig, Germany last week, but the lack of infrastructure is still a concern. Automakers are doing their best to address those worries.
The electricity bill is only $30 when driving 1,500 kilometers per month. We are also equipping charging facilities at parking lots in large supermarket chains, so drivers can charge their cars with much less fuss.
Visitors can test drive some of these oil-free vehicles at the expo, and 1 automobile is given away each day to a lucky visitor. Song Ji-sun, Arirang News, Busan.
Well, that's one reason to visit Korea, but there are many others, especially if you are from Russia as well. A special Korea-Russia tourism forum is being held in Seoul on this Friday to mark the two countries' mutual visit year that runs from this year to the next. The forum is focusing on ways to boost the number of tourists heading to each country and introduces new tourism products in Korea and Russia. More than 100 officials and tourism-related businesses from both countries are attending the forum to seek ways to boost mutual tourism. Now, the two countries signed a visa-free travel agreement earlier this year.
Beast meets beauty care. Beauty and cosmetic products are no longer solely the preserve of women. The male skincare market is booming and it's Asian men spending the most. Data compiled by market research firm Euromonitor shows the Asia-Pacific region accounted for 64% of the $3.3 billion market last year. China had the largest share at about $975 million, with Korea sitting in second place at $635 million. When it comes to per-person spending, Korea easily topped the list. Korean men spent just over $25 on skincare last year, which is triple that of Danish men, who came in second on the list. The heavy consumption among Korean men is attributed to male celebrities advertising skincare products aggressively. Heads up to all you fathers or daughters out there. If you tell your little girls that she can grow up to be anything she wants to be, you might want to roll up your sleeves and pick up the vacuum and wash the dishes a little more often. A new study by the University of British Columbia found that daughters closely watch how their parents share household chores, and the way in which they do plays a crucial role in shaping how girls view the world. When a father performs a greater share of traditionally female household chores, his daughter is less likely to say she wants to pursue a non-traditional female career. Even in cases where both parents endorse gender equality outwardly, the father's share of the housework was seen as the biggest factor. The results of the study are published in the U.S.-based Psychological Science magazine.
We now turn to our In the Press. Now, this is when we look at some of the issues that have captured the attention of the domestic media throughout the week.
And to help us do that, we go over to our Yudian.
Good evening and happy Friday. Let's dive straight into 동아일보 and take a look at the story that made one of its front pages. Now, headline over here reads, Korea's financial services isolated, a look overseas. It's pointing out that Korea's financial market is falling behind compared to other Asian countries because it has been overly dependent on its domestic market. Now, Professor Masahiro Kawai at University of Tokyo here said that Korea should utilize its high current account surplus and invest in countries like Vietnam and Indonesia, regions in the process of rapid urbanization. He also recommended for the European model for Asia to minimize the effects of possible economic crisis in the future. Now, as you may remember, a lot of blame for the deaths of the Seoul ferry disaster were directed at the failure to rescue passengers during the so-called golden time. And there has been a string of deadly fire accidents here in Korea in recent days, and the dailies are putting the focus on the golden time of those accidents as well. Now, the headline here from the 중앙일보 reads, golden time for accidents, 5 minutes. Now, and the map below shows how long it takes on average for fire trucks to arrive at the site of the accident by different regions. Now, the scattered parts in green are aside from the regions from green, the rest in orange and red are where the fire trucks were unable to arrive during the golden time to put out the fire, showing once again how slow Korea's emergency response system is. Now, shifting gears, competition is heating up between Samsung, Apple, and Google, not in the mobile phone market, but in the smart home market. Now, let's take a look at this business section story from 조선일보, and the headline reads, a smart home race, neck and neck race between Samsung, Google, and Apple. Now, a smart home is defined here in the paper as technology that can be used to control and monitor home appliances. Now, zooming in closer to this chart right over here, we can see that the article notes that Apple has an advantage since it only has a single mobile phone model, its iPhone, which means it only has to worry about integrating the iPhone into the smart home system. Now, different story for Samsung, which has a wide range of different models, but still the paper notes Samsung holds the top place in terms of home appliances such as TVs and refrigerators, which does give it an advantage. Now, Google has acquired Nest, a hardware company, to focus on building a hardware network to also jump into the smart home market. Now, moving on, the Chungang business paper over here also highlights another sector where competition is growing fierce. The headline over here reads, Apple and Samsung's next battlefield, this time music streaming. Now, Apple purchased the headphone maker Beats as well as the subscription music streaming service this week. And Samsung had already launched a streaming service, Milk Music, earlier in March this year. And the move into the streaming market is quite understandable as it is growing rapidly, rounding up revenue worth of $1 billion seen by the graph over here. Now, that does it for this week's look at the stories in the Korean press.
Well, time now to get a check on the weather forecast. Let's go over to our Michelle Park. Michelle, our days seem to get hotter and hotter, and it already feels like, summer is out there. So are we in for a blistering few months?
Well, not exactly. Due to the early hot weather, we can expect our summer to be less hot than the previous years, believe it or not. And however, we're expecting lots of rain this summer.
Any chance of precipitation on the way now to give us a break from the heat?
Well, not this weekend, but on Monday we can expect nationwide rain, which will bring down the highs that has been topping out in the 30s now. And tomorrow we can expect a hot, sunny weather conditions. Now, the UV levels are the highest from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. and currently the levels are pretty up high and especially high up in the southern regions. So try to avoid being outdoors much during those hours and apply sunblock before heading out. Now going over to our temperature readings, Seoul will top out at 19 before reaching up to 32 in the afternoon. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Daegu and Busan will peak up to 35 and 26 degrees. Now moving over to other regions, Jeju Island tops out at 28, Dokdo at 26, while Mangungang tops out at 27. Well, that's all for now. I'm Michelle Park, and back to you guys.
Thank you for that, Michelle. And that brings us to the end of our newscast for this week and month. Thank you for watching. For our viewers in Korea, have a wonderful rest of the evening. This has been Daniel Chen.
And I'm Moon Gan-young. To those of you in other parts of the world, have a great start to your day and a great weekend. We hope to see you right back here, same time, Monday evening. Bye-bye.